Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to part 2 of my Australian life journey essentially. So in the last video I basically spoke about how I applied for university here in Australia and how I got my temporary resident visa. So in today's video we're going to be talking about my permanent residency and then also my citizenship. To be completely honest, it was fairly quick. I didn't actually wait too long until I got my citizenship once I got my permanent residency, but anyway, I'm going too fast. Let's go back to where I left off. Okay, so at this point I had my temporary resident visa, and that pretty much gives you pretty much the same benefits of a permanent residency visa, only that you don't have access to Medicare. You still needed to have your own private health insurance and whatnot, but you know, pretty much everything is good. Like you can work full-time, there's no restrictions, stuff like that, and you didn't need a sponsor. So a sponsor is basically like an employer saying that they are willing to hire you for an extended period of time, and that's why you need that visa. I went through the independent route, which is why I went for the graduate visa, because I didn't want to rely on a company. I've heard so many horror stories of people applying for these sponsorship visas where they, you know, started working at this employer and then they just ended up hating working there to the point that they were like seriously considering just leaving. But then if you leave, I think you only have like a month to find a new employer or find a new visa. So I didn't want to go through that stress. That's why I went through the graduate visa, temporary resident visa. It wasn't easy to find a job, to be honest. Like I was very lucky that I was still working at an aged care facility as a nursing assistant, but my goal was to really work at a hospital to get that experience and stuff like that. But it was so hard to find a job at all in a hospital. So basically a lot of the hospitals in New South Wales at the time, they required their nurses to have at least X amount of experience before you can apply for the job, or you've successfully completed a new grad program, which is basically kind of like a 1 year, so like it's just basically a 1 year specialized nursing program for new graduates. But to get into that program, you'd have to be a permanent resident at the very least. I did not have that, so all my options were pretty much gone. Like the only places that would probably hire me were aged care facilities, but I didn't want to work in aged care facilities just because I wanted to expand my clinical nursing skills and stuff like that. And I heard from other people from other industries as well, whether it be like engineering, teaching and stuff like that, a lot of workplaces did have something quite similar where they wanted people with X amount of experience, or they had to be a permanent resident at the very least. Like there were so many clauses, it was ridiculous. So looking for a job, any kind of job, was really hard. And here in Australia it's quite common not to be hired because you're overqualified. So you know, I applied for restaurants, I applied for cafes, I applied for retail jobs, and I always got rejected. And then when I would ask why I got rejected, it was usually because you're overqualified. And the reason they say that is because they're worried that, you know, you're only applying for this job and they train you, you know, they invest a lot of time and money on you to, you know, be able to perform the duties, and then you're just going to end up finding another job anyway in the field that you initially wanted to work in. So in that aspect, I do understand why I didn't get the job, but you know, at the time it was very, very heartbreaking. So I ended up looking elsewhere, like looking at other states and stuff like that. But I also had met a guy, so now my fiance, in Melbourne. So I kind of looked towards Melbourne because I already met like a guy, and you know, it's like, life is going to be good if, you know, I can find a job and have a boyfriend at the same time. So I moved down to Melbourne, so that's where I live now. I found a nursing agency, which is basically casual jobs as well, but it was offering hospital experience, so that was great. So I did that. Unfortunately, that job didn't last very long because the shifts weren't very consistent. So I moved on to another nursing agency, again, very similar sort of like deal, still working as a registered nurse, but casual. So when I finally moved down here, I started working, and then a couple of months later, I was eligible to apply for permanent residency. So I believe at the time you had to have just been living in Australia for at least 3 or 4 years legally. I know they've changed the requirements now. I think they've moved it up to 5 years now. I'm not really sure. But basically, they also count the time that you were a student as legally living in Australia. I don't believe they count being a tourist. So if you're like a tourist here for like years or something like that, they don't count that. They only count like working, student, that sort of stuff. So I didn't waste any time. I didn't wait for my 18 months to lapse. I just applied for it because I knew that visa rules can change so quickly here in Australia, just depending on the politicians and which party's in power. Visa rules just change so quickly, so as soon as you're eligible, I highly recommend just grabbing it and then just apply. So essentially, if you apply or submit your application at a certain period, if the rules change while your application is being processed, it doesn't affect that. So whenever the changes, let's say you submitted stuff in February and then there was a law change in June and you're still waiting for results, whatever rules were in place during February will apply to your application. So even if, you know, the new rules are in June, it won't affect your application, if that makes sense. So yeah, as soon as you can, just apply for it, because yeah, it saves you a lot of heartbreak. I got my permanent residency. I think I only waited a couple of months again for it to arrive. Again, I had to go through the whole bridging visa sort of thing, which was a little bit of a pain because then I had to, you know, inform my employers that was the case and stuff like that. So whenever you do have visa changes and you're working, you have to let your employers know. But that was fairly simple. It was just annoying. And then I finally got my visa, and then I became a permanent resident, and then I was eligible for Medicare. And then that was pretty much when I kind of stopped applying for my health insurance, like, or paying for my health insurance, because essentially Medicare is government funded healthcare, so it comes out of your tax. It pretty much covers everything. Obviously not as good as private health insurance, but you know, if you're really strapped for cash, Medicare is pretty much all you really need for all your basic essential healthcare needs and stuff like that. So that's why I stopped paying for health insurance. And then after a year, I was eligible for citizenship. So citizenship, I believe at the time, 5 years legal stay in Australia, and at that point I had. At this point, I didn't really rely on lawyers or anything like that, because it was fairly simple to apply for the citizenship. Like, the requirements weren't as long-winded as all the other visas that I had to experience. Like, it was literally just Australian, it was pretty much just all like Australian requirements from memory, like just a police check from Australia, and yeah, I actually don't really remember what else I needed to. There was a form that I had to film, obviously, that was very, very long, but otherwise it was fairly simple. I had to go for my Australian citizenship test. The test I thought was going to be like really hard, but it was actually fairly simple. So they basically give you access to, I think it was like a link or a booklet or something like that. It had some history about Australia, the national anthem and stuff like that, so you had to remember all of that sort of stuff. And then you go to a testing facility, and then they give you this, they make you sit at this really old computer. At the time it looked like it was running Windows XP. It was just to give you context of how old that computer looked. And then you had to listen to the questions, and then, you know, you just answer the questions. I think it was only like 10 questions and that was it. And yeah, I got my citizenship. So basically, once you pass all of that stuff, you don't actually become a citizen until your ceremony. So at the time, I only really had my partner with me. Like, my family wasn't in Australia, and all my friends were kind of working, so I just took my partner, and it was a very, very good day. Like, a lot of the hard work that my family and I have put in had just like kind of culminated to this. And I didn't have to worry about, you know, political changes and my visa suddenly being stripped away from me and stuff like that. And like, I know those like very paranoia things, but you know, as long as I was a citizen, I didn't have to worry about that anymore. And then yeah, I applied for my Australian passport a few months later because I was going to go traveling with my partner, and that's pretty much it. Like, I'm now an Australian citizen. I've been an Australian citizen for a couple of years now, like probably 3 years. I don't remember. It's been a while. Like I said, my whole journey here in Australia has kind of like been a blur, but it's been a very beautiful, blissful blur. So yeah, that's my storytime journey of how I became an Australian citizen from a student from overseas and my experiences. Yeah, if you guys would like me to speak more about my experiences here in Australia, like whether it be like visa applications, like stuff like that, or like just how it is to live in a certain place, definitely let me know if you guys are interested in that video. I'm definitely keen on doing that kind of stuff anyway, but just to help narrow down the topics of what you guys are actually interested in. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.